My boyfriend said he needed my car for a job interview, but I tracked the GPS to a luxury beach resort where he was with another girl posting Insta stories calling him best boyfriend ever while flashing my car keys. My blood was absolutely boiling. My boyfriend, Tobias, just sent me a dinner invitation, claiming he had something important to tell me. The same Tobias who, last weekend, sent me a shirtless selfie from another woman's bed, accompanied by a smug caption about trust. He was either completely delusional or testing just how much disrespect I was willing to swallow. And honestly, he was about to get schooled. Let me rewind, because this entire situation has been such a spectacular train wreck that I genuinely need to recount it just to make sense of it myself. Plus, I desperately need you guys to tell me if I'm the crazy one, or if my boyfriend has completely annihilated every single boundary that exists in a relationship. It all started 3 weeks ago. Tobias came home from work and casually dropped a bombshell. His friend, Andrea, was supposedly having roommate drama. Her roommate had suddenly bailed with 2 weeks' notice, leaving Andrea in a frantic panic about making rent. A normal friend crisis, right? My first thought was to be supportive, maybe suggest some roommate-finding apps, or offer to help her post on social media. But then Tobias, with a straight face, dropped the real bomb, as if it were the most reasonable, logical thing in the world. He announced, not asked, announced, that he was going to stay at Andrea's place for a few weeks to help her with rent while she found someone new. Just like that. No discussion with me, no asking how I felt, just a casual declaration that my boyfriend was essentially moving in with another woman. I actually laughed. I mean, what else was I supposed to do? I truly thought he was joking. Who in their right mind announces they're moving in with a female friend and expects their girlfriend to just smile and wave? But Tobias wasn't laughing. He was looking at me with this irritatingly righteous expression, as if I should be impressed by his generosity, his heroism. When I finally managed to pick my jaw off the floor and told him, very clearly, that I was not comfortable with that arrangement, his face hardened. He got this incredibly condescending look and actually said I was being selfish. Selfish, like wanting my boyfriend to not live with another woman makes me some kind of terrible person. He then doubled down, claiming that if I trusted him, this wouldn't be an issue, and that my reaction was showing my true colors. I tried so hard to explain that this wasn't about trust. It was about boundaries. It was about respect. I told him that most couples, regardless of their trust levels, wouldn't be okay with this kind of setup. But Tobias just kept circling back to this infuriating narrative that I was being controlling and insecure, as if those were dirty words that should make me back down and apologize. The argument dragged on for hours, a relentless, exhausting cycle. He even started bringing up random, irrelevant examples, like when I'd been friendly with male coworkers, or when my ex, Brian, texted about some old stuff at my place. He genuinely acted like those situations were somehow equivalent to him literally living with another woman. The mental gymnastics he performed were honestly impressive, bordering on Olympic-level manipulation. What really grated on my nerves was how he continuously framed Andrea's situation like she was some helpless victim who would surely end up homeless without his personal, heroic intervention. This woman is 25, has a decent job, and graduated college. She's far from helpless. There are a million ways to handle roommate issues that don't involve my boyfriend moving in a playhouse with her. But according to Tobias, I was the heartless one for suggesting alternatives. Every single solution I proposed was shot down because, apparently, nothing could possibly work except him personally saving the day by becoming her temporary live-in roommate. His hero complex was absolutely unreal. The absolute worst part? I later found out that Andrea knew all about our fights. Tobias had been discussing our relationship problems with her, getting her input on how to handle my supposed trust issues. The sheer audacity of them analyzing my behavior and strategizing about our relationship behind my back made my blood absolutely boil. So, I held my ground. I told him, again, that I wasn't comfortable and that there had to be other ways to help Andrea. I thought, naively, that maybe he'd respect my feelings enough to find a compromise. Boy, was I wrong. Last Friday night, Tobias announced he was going over to Andrea's place to help her organize her spare room for potential roommate interviews. He said he'd probably stay late since they had a lot to sort through. Fine, whatever. I had plans with my friend Laura anyway, so I didn't think much of it. But then Saturday morning rolled around, and I hadn't heard from him. No good morning text, no check-in, nothing. When I finally texted him asking how the organizing went, he responded with the most casual message, saying he'd ended up crashing there because they worked until really late and he was too tired to drive home. I was annoyed, but I tried to be understanding. Maybe they really had worked late, and it was a practical decision. But then, around noon, my phone buzzed with a notification that made my blood run cold. It was a selfie from Tobias. He was in Andrea's bed, shirtless, with the caption, "Some people trust, some people don't." I stared at that picture for a solid 5 minutes, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. My boyfriend had spent the night at another woman's place, woke up in her bed, and then decided the appropriate response was to send me a photo proving it, complete with some smug, passive-aggressive caption about trust. The audacity was breathtaking. Who does that? Who thinks sending their girlfriend a shirtless selfie from another woman's bed is going to prove a point about trust? It was like he was deliberately trying to push every single one of my buttons. I called him immediately. He answered on the first ring, sounding way too cheerful. When I asked him, through gritted teeth, what the hell he thought he was doing sending me that picture, he had the absolute nerve to act confused. He claimed he thought I'd appreciate him being transparent about where he was, instead of hiding it. Transparent. As if taking a selfie in another woman's bed is transparency and not a deliberate provocation. The conversation escalated rapidly. I told him that sending that picture was disrespectful, deeply hurtful, and that spending the night at Andrea's place crossed a massive line for me. But instead of apologizing, instead of showing any understanding of why I was so upset, he doubled down. He said I was proving his point about not trusting him, and that if I was secure in our relationship, I wouldn't be making such a big deal about him helping a friend. He actually had the audacity to say that my reaction was exactly why he needed to reconsider our relationship dynamics. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about Andrea's roommate situation anymore. This was about Tobias testing how much he could get away with, seeing how far he could push my boundaries before I'd finally snap. And honestly, he was about to find out. By the way, if you're still with me, make sure to hit subscribe. More unbelievable stories and the wild ride of how I handled this are coming. But the real kicker came Sunday evening when I got a Facebook message from Andrea herself. I'd never spoken to this woman directly in my life, but apparently, she felt entitled to insert herself into our relationship drama. Her message was short and, in her mind, probably sweet. She told me that I should grow a backbone if I wanted to date someone like Tobias, and that my insecurity was embarrassing to watch. She finished by saying Tobias deserved someone who could handle him having female friends without creating drama. I screenshotted that message so fast it wasn't even funny. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of this woman to message me about my own relationship was beyond anything I could have imagined. And the fact that she was clearly discussing our private business with Tobias made my blood boil even hotter. When I confronted Tobias about Andrea's message, he barely seemed surprised. He actually defended her. He said she was just looking out for him because she could see how stressed our fights were making him. He actually defended her right to message me and said maybe I should listen to what she had to say. That was the moment I realized I was dating someone who thought it was perfectly appropriate for his female friend to lecture his girlfriend about relationship boundaries. Someone who saw nothing wrong with another woman telling me how to handle my own boyfriend. So here we are, 3 weeks into this absolute disaster. And Tobias just texted asking if I wanted to have dinner tonight so he could tell me something important. Part of me was morbidly curious about what he thought was so important that it required a special announcement. But a much bigger part of me was already planning exactly what I was going to say to him. Because while Tobias had been playing these little games and testing my boundaries, I'd been doing some planning of my own. And I thought it was time for him to learn that some tests go both ways. Okay, I don't even know where to begin with what just happened at dinner. I'm literally sitting in my car in the restaurant parking lot right now because I cannot even process what Tobias just pulled. So, remember how he wanted to meet for dinner to tell me something important? Well, buckle up, because this man had completely lost his mind, and I was honestly questioning if I ever truly knew him at all. I got to the restaurant first and spent about 10 minutes mentally preparing myself for whatever bombshell he was about to drop. A tiny part of me, a hopeful, foolish part, was praying maybe he'd come to his senses about the whole Andrea situation and wanted to apologize. Nope, not even close. Tobias walked in looking way too confident for someone who had spent the weekend disrespecting his girlfriend in every possible way. He slid into the booth across from me with that smile I used to think was charming, but now just looked sickeningly smug. No apology, no acknowledgement of how messed up the last few days had been. Just casual small talk like nothing had happened. When I finally asked him what was so important that we needed a special dinner conversation, he got this serious, almost solemn expression and said he'd been doing a lot of thinking about our relationship and where things were heading. My stomach dropped, because that tone usually means someone's about to get dumped. But instead of breaking up with me, he launched into this whole pre-rehearsed speech about how he'd realized our recent conflicts had shown him concerning patterns in my behavior. He said he was worried about my trust issues and how they might affect our future together. The sheer audacity of this man to flip the script and make me the problem after everything he'd done was absolutely mind-blowing. I interrupted him right there and asked if he was seriously sitting across from me trying to make his inappropriate behavior my fault. But he just kept going with his little speech about how relationships require trust and compromise, and how he'd been reflecting on whether I was really ready for the kind of mature relationship he was looking for. Then he dropped the real bomb. He said he decided to move forward with helping Andrea, regardless of my feelings about it, because he wasn't going to let my insecurities dictate how he treated his friends. He announced this like it was some noble stand he was taking for friendship and loyalty. I stared at him for a solid 30 seconds, trying to process what I just heard. This man had just told me he was moving in with another woman despite my clearly stated boundaries, and he was framing it like some principled decision rather than a massive betrayal of our relationship. I asked him point blank, "Are you actually telling me that you are choosing to prioritize Andrea's housing situation over my comfort and our relationship boundaries?" His response: he wasn't choosing anyone over anyone else. He was just refusing to abandon a friend in need. Maybe he'd come to his senses about the whole Andrea situation and wanted to apologize. Nope, not even close. Tobias walked in looking way too confident for someone who had spent the weekend disrespecting his girlfriend in every possible way. He slid into the booth across from me with that smile I used to think was charming, but now just looked sickeningly smug. No apology, no acknowledgement of how messed up the last few days had been. Just casual small talk like nothing had happened. When I finally asked him what was so important that we needed a special dinner conversation, he got this serious, almost solemn expression and said he'd been doing a lot of thinking about our relationship and where things were heading. My stomach dropped, because that tone usually means someone's about to get dumped. But instead of breaking up with me, he launched into this whole pre-rehearsed speech about how he'd realized our recent conflicts had shown him concerning patterns in my behavior. He said he was worried about my trust issues and how they might affect our future together. The sheer audacity of this man to flip the script and make me the problem after everything he'd done was absolutely mind-blowing. I interrupted him right there and asked if he was seriously sitting across from me trying to make his inappropriate behavior my fault. But he just kept going with his little speech about how relationships require trust and compromise, and how he'd been reflecting on whether I was really ready for the kind of mature relationship he was looking for. Then he dropped the real bomb. He said he decided to move forward with helping Andrea, regardless of my feelings about it, because he wasn't going to let my insecurities dictate how he treated his friends. He announced this like it was some noble stand he was taking for friendship and loyalty. I stared at him for a solid 30 seconds, trying to process what I just heard. This man had just told me he was moving in with another woman despite my clearly stated boundaries, and he was framing it like some principled decision rather than a massive betrayal of our relationship. I asked him point blank, "Are you actually telling me that you are choosing to prioritize Andrea's housing situation over my comfort and our relationship boundaries?" His response: he wasn't choosing anyone over anyone else. He was just refusing to abandon a friend in need of me prioritizing another man's needs over his comfort. But then he caught himself and went back to his rational therapist voice. He said that hypothetical situations weren't helpful and that we needed to focus on the actual circumstances we were dealing with. When I pointed out that his inability to answer my question was pretty telling, he said I was trying to trap him and that my argumentative attitude was exactly why he was concerned about our relationship dynamic. Everything was my fault. My argumentative attitude, my trust issues, my inability to support his friendships, my lack of emotional maturity. According to Tobias, I was basically a walking red flag who was lucky he was patient enough to help me work through my problems. By the time we left the restaurant, he'd made it crystal clear that he was moving in with Andrea whether I liked it or not, and that my job as his girlfriend was to smile and be supportive while he played house with another woman who specifically requested that I stay away. But here's the thing that Tobias didn't realize. While he was busy outlining all the ways I needed to change my behavior and attitude, I was making some plans of my own. Because if he thinks I'm just going to sit around waiting for him to come back from his little domestic experiment with Andrea, he's about to learn exactly how wrong he can be. You guys, I am having way too much fun with this situation. And honestly, watching Tobias dig himself deeper and deeper into this hole, all while thinking he's being so clever, has become my new favorite entertainment. If he wants to play games and test my boundaries, well, two can definitely play that game. So, remember how I said the gloves were coming off? Well, I spent Wednesday making some calls and setting things in motion. And let me tell you, I've been having an absolute blast watching this whole thing unfold. Wednesday night, Tobias texted me this casual little announcement about packing his stuff to move into Andrea's place over the weekend. No discussion, no checking in, just this matter-of-fact message like he was telling me he picked up dry cleaning. The audacity was honestly impressive, but it also gave me the perfect opportunity to start having some fun. Instead of getting upset or arguing with him, I responded with, "That's nice, honey. Make sure you pack your toothbrush. Wouldn't want Andrea to think you have bad hygiene when you're playing house together." The passive-aggressive sweetness was chef's kiss perfect. He called me within 10 minutes, clearly confused by my response. When he asked why I was being sarcastic, I told him I wasn't being sarcastic at all. I was just being supportive of his new living arrangement with his female friend. The way I said supportive made it clear I was mocking him, but he couldn't quite call me out on it. That phone call was honestly hilarious. Tobias kept trying to bait me into an argument about boundaries and trust, but I just kept responding with these sweet, understanding comments that were obviously sarcastic, but technically supportive. Every time he'd explain why his decision was reasonable, I'd say something like, "Oh, absolutely. That makes perfect sense. I'm sure Andrea really appreciates having such a caring roommate." By the end of the call, he was clearly frustrated that I wasn't giving him the dramatic reaction he was expecting. He actually asked me directly why I wasn't more upset about his decision, and I told him that I'd been doing some thinking and had come to some interesting conclusions about our relationship. When he pressed me for details, I said we could discuss it later because I had some plans of my own to figure out. The confusion in his voice was absolutely delicious. He'd expected me to be begging him not to move in with Andrea, not making mysterious comments about my own plans. Thursday morning, I woke up to a string of texts from him documenting his packing progress, like I was supposed to care about the logistics of him moving in with another woman. He sent pictures of boxes and even asked if I wanted to help him load his car. The level of delusion was honestly breathtaking. But instead of ignoring the messages, I decided to have some fun with them. I responded to each picture with increasingly ridiculous comments. When he sent a photo of his clothes packed up, I wrote, "Make sure you pack something nice for your dinner dates with Andrea." When he showed me his toiletries box, I said, "Don't forget condoms. You never know what might happen during those late-night movie sessions." The fact that he couldn't tell if I was being serious or mocking him made it even better. He kept sending confused responses asking what I meant, and I'd just send back innocent emojis like I had no idea why he was confused. Thursday afternoon, I put phase 2 of my plan into action. Remember my ex, Brian, that Tobias had thrown in my face during our trust arguments? Well, I decided it was time for him to meet his match when it came to opposite-sex friendships. I texted Brian asking if he wanted to grab coffee and catch up, and his response was immediate and enthusiastic. When we met up, I told him about Tobias's living situation with Andrea, and Brian's reaction was everything I'd hoped for. He was shocked and said he couldn't believe any guy would disrespect his girlfriend like that. But here's where it gets good. While we were talking, I started getting texts from Tobias updating me on his move-in progress. So, I started reading them out loud to Brian, and we both started laughing about how ridiculous the whole situation was. Brian said he couldn't believe Tobias was actually sending me play-by-play updates about moving in with another woman, and that if he were my boyfriend, he'd be focused on making me feel secure, not some random female friend. That's when I got a brilliant idea. I asked Brian if he wanted to help me send Tobias a little message of my own. Brian was immediately on board. So we took a selfie together at the coffee shop, and I posted it to my Instagram story with the caption, "Catching up with old friends who actually know how to respect boundaries." Within 20 minutes, my phone was buzzing with a call from Tobias. When I answered, he immediately asked who I was with and why I was posting cryptic Instagram stories. I told him I was just catching up with Brian, and that we'd been having a really interesting conversation. The jealousy in his voice was immediate and obvious. He started asking all these questions about why I was hanging out with my ex and what we'd been talking about. When I told him that Brian had been giving me some perspective on my current relationship situation, Tobias got this panicked edge to his voice. I stayed completely calm and said that since he was exploring new living arrangements, I figured I could explore reconnecting with old friends, too. I could practically hear his brain short-circuiting on the other end. Friday morning, Tobias called to let me know he was officially moved in at Andrea's place, but his tone was way less cheerful than before. He kept asking about my plans for the day and whether I was going to see Brian again. When I said Brian and I might grab dinner later, the silence on the phone was absolutely golden. Instead of his usual confident lecture about trust and friendship, Tobias started asking why I felt the need to spend so much time with my ex. I reminded him that he'd spent weeks telling me that opposite-sex friendships were totally normal and that anyone who had a problem with them was just insecure. He tried to explain why my situation with Brian was different from his situation with Andrea, but every reason he gave just highlighted his own hypocrisy. When I pointed that out with fake innocence, he got even more flustered. That evening, Brian and I did go to dinner, and I made sure to document it thoroughly. We took pictures of our food, selfies at the restaurant, and I even posted a story of us sharing dessert with the caption, "When someone actually knows how to make you feel special." My phone immediately started blowing up with texts from Tobias, but I didn't respond until later that night. When I finally called him back, he immediately started interrogating me about my evening with Brian. I told him we'd had the most amazing time, and that it was so refreshing to be with someone who actually listened to me and cared about my feelings. I said Brian had been asking about my relationship and couldn't believe how Tobias had been treating me. The panic in Tobias's voice was absolutely delicious. He started insisting that Brian was probably just trying to manipulate me because he wanted to get back together, and that I was being naive if I couldn't see what was really happening. I laughed and said it was interesting that he was so concerned about another man's motives when he'd been lecturing me for weeks about trusting people and not being insecure. I asked him why he was suddenly so worried about my friendships when his own living situation was supposedly so innocent. Saturday, I decided to really turn up the heat. Brian and I spent the day together. We went to the farmer's market, walked around downtown, and just had this really natural, easy time together. I documented everything on social media, making sure to show how happy and relaxed I looked. Meanwhile, Tobias kept texting me, asking what I was doing and why I wasn't responding to his messages. When I finally responded that evening, I told him I'd been having such a great day that I hadn't even looked at my phone. That night, when Tobias called, he was clearly agitated. He started lecturing me about how my behavior with Brian was inappropriate and disrespectful to our relationship. I told him I found it fascinating that he was suddenly so concerned about relationship boundaries when he'd been living with another woman all week. When he tried to explain the difference, I cut him off and said that Brian had been helping me gain some real perspective on what I deserved in a relationship. Sunday morning, I woke up to Instagram stories from Andrea showing her and Tobias's domestic routine, making breakfast together, organizing